If you're thinking about buying a house in France and Brittany is one of the areas you're thinking about, stay tuned, we're going to have a deeper look. I'm here today in the town of Josselin, well known for its chateau and its canal. I'll be wandering around and we'll be talking about Brittany. Brittany, or Bretagne as the French call it, is a region in the northwest of France. It's basically the bit which juts out below the UK into the Atlantic Sea. It comprises of 4 different departments: Ille-et-Vilaine, Côte d'Amour, Finistère and Morbihan. And in fact the Bretons would even argue that the Loire-Atlantique should be part of Brittany as well. That's another story. Believe it or not, Brittany actually represents 1/3 of the French mainland coastline, with its 2,470 kilometres of coast. Starts on the actual channel to the north, goes around to the Atlantic and back down to the Bay of Biscay. So that's quite a bit of coastline. It's a Celtic nation similar to Scotland or Wales, and they are quite proud of their roots. It's also the second most popular place for French people for holidays, just behind the Côte d'Azur. In France, Bretons actually have quite a reputation as being
party animals.
There's a few things might back this up, or it might be the fact that makes this happen. But Brittany is actually well known for its music festivals. It's got about 3 of the 5 major festivals in France happen in Brittany. One is the Vieille Charrue, which is the biggest European festival, general music. Then you actually have Hellfest, which is Europe's biggest heavy metal festival. And you also actually have the Festival Interceltique de Lorient, which is the world's biggest Celtic festival. All musically orientated and, well, depending on your tastes, it keeps you busy. Another factor linked to that is actually, if you like a bit of nightlife, although in France nightlife in the countryside is pretty much non-existent. The national average for bars in France in rural areas is 2.2 bars per 10,000 inhabitants. In Brittany it's 4.9, so over twice as many. So I'm not saying it's kicking around here, but it's actually a bit more lively than other places. The capital of the region is Rennes, and Rennes is also the capital of the Ille-et-Vilaine. For the other departments, it's Morbihan has Vannes, Côte d'Amour has Saint-Brieuc, and Finistère has Quimper, although some people think it's Brest. All the capital towns, or county towns if you wish, actually are situated on the coast, except for Rennes. And that is mainly because the Brittany has very much a seafaring history, and as with all regions with seafaring history, the trading ports built up into big important towns over the years.
Aye, Captain.
The population is just under 5 million, and the density is 142 people per kilometre squared, which by French standards is, let's say, fairly average. For travelling to Brittany, there are 2 main choices. It's either by sea or by air. Well, obviously you can always go by car as well, it's not an island. But if you're travelling by sea, there's 2 ferry ports, both run by Brittany Ferries. One is actually in Roscoff in the Finistère county, and the other one is in St Malo on the border of Ille-et-Vilaine and Côte d'Amour. The other option is via plane. The 2 main airports for Brittany are Rennes and Nantes. Okay, Nantes not actually in Brittany, but everyone refers to it as a Breton airport. Then after that, depending where or to you want to fly, there are lesser airports in Lorient, Quimper, Brest, Morlaix and Saint-Brieuc. But once I said, it all depends where you're going or coming from. The typical sort of house you find in Brittany is usually built in granite with a slate roof. Most of them are what we call longères, longère being a long-house. The majority of these farmhouses are actually built of mason's granite. The further west you go, the bigger the blocks quite often you'll find when you get into Finistère on the coast there, some pretty hefty blocks. The further east you go, you get more and more cob buildings. Also, the further east you go, you get more and more second floors on the houses, whereas a lot of the older ones to the west just have the ground floor and then the actual loft space. We also get what we call neo-Breton. The neo-Breton homes were actually a style which was often built in about, let's say, the 80s, 90s. Quite fairly modern build, but keeping traditional features like the actual same angled slate roof, quite often an L shape to break off from the actual longère feel, and quite often with the very first ones, usually a bit of stonework around the doors and windows, if not a full-blown wall. They actually reckon the more stone you actually had on your house, the posher it was. Good thing about these houses, although slightly dated in style, they are very solid builds, so quite a good investment. Modern houses these days, as with anywhere, well, they're getting pretty well as light as they can make them to save costs. Quite a lot of those houses I'd like to see in 100 years' time, but well, that's another story as well. And I don't think I'll be here to tell it. When it comes to house prices, Brittany is like an island or an islet jutting out into the sea, so a lot of coastal area there. And as with all coastal areas, the closer you get to the coast, the more expensive the houses. If you actually go down to the posh areas near Van, for example, or Quiberon, in certain areas you can get almost up to €10,000 a metre square. A quick reminder about these average prices when we talk about the price per metre square. An average 3-bedroom house in France is roughly about 100 metres square for a reasonable sized one. So easiest thing is to multiply the actual average price by 100, and there you get a good price guide for you. You go 30 kilometres inland, you can get a decent one for about 200, 220. If you go real inland right into the sticks, you can get a livable 3-bedroom house for under 100,000. Ille-Vilaine is the most expensive of the 4 departments, mainly due to the actual capital town of Rennes being there, and obviously the actual decent jobs and employment, but also due to the actual coastal resort of St Malo, which has been a coastal resort for about 200 years now, coming on for. Started by the British, believe it or not. Second is the county of Morbihan. I reckon this is mainly due to the actual majority of southern coast it has here. The southern coast in Brittany the sea's warmer, the weather's better than the north coast, and they actually reckon there's probably about 3 to 4 degrees difference between the north and south. So that doesn't sound much, but it's enough to make the people come down and want to live in the south as opposed to north, like anywhere else really. Third out of the 4 is Finistère, possibly because it still has some southern coast. Admittedly, the western Atlantic coast knocks it down a bit because there's a lot of Atlantic swells coming in. And finally, you actually have Côte d'Amour, which is still a lovely place to be, and admittedly it's not that much cheaper than the others, but it is the cheapest of the 4. Northern coast, slightly colder, a bit more rural, but there's still some lovely places to be up there. Climate-wise, I'd say Rennes is probably the hottest of the 4 departments. Due to that, it's actually closed in. All the other 3 departments tend to have sea breezes coming in, etc., etc. I'd say the best climate would be in Morbihan. We do actually get the hot, sunny days, etc., etc. But also, between us and the Côte d'Amour, there is a hill range which acts as a rain shadow for the rain coming down to the north. So we tend to have about 1/3 or 1/2 of the rain which happens in the Côte d'Amour. Then Finistère, which is on the Atlantic coast, acts as a natural barrier to Morbihan and Côte d'Amour, obviously. But the actual combination of the hill range and Finistère, plus a third factor, which is the Gulf Stream, a bit further south from the Brittany, but brings up the hot air onto the southern coast, and that means Morbihan tends to be the better place weather-wise. So, if I was you and I was looking for a house in Brittany, where would I be looking? I'll just make a boat coming past. So, if I was you and I was looking for a property in Brittany, where would I be looking? I'd be looking, well, to start with, half an hour away from the coast, because once you get to half an hour away, the prices have dropped off about as much as they need to. You can get slightly cheaper ones a bit further inland, but you've got a nice mix of proximity to the coast and the big towns, and rural life and decent house prices. After that, I'd probably go for Morbihan or southern Finistère, purely and simply for the weather factor. Ille-Vilaine, I'd cross off completely because of my coastal attachments, let's say. And so there you have it. Morbihan, southern Finistère, half an hour in from the coast. You can get some real nice houses from about 200,000 to, well, up as much as you want, obviously. But for a decent normal house, let's say 200 to 400,000, you've got a good choice of property. So I hope this helps. If it does, don't forget to click that old like, subscribe and bell button, and I'll see you soon.